this stuff that we all assume it takes years and years for a kid to learn, but really it takes years and years for a kid to be taught the academic basics that are university prerequisites. That's different from learning.
Well, hello there. I am very excited today to say that we are joined by Blake Boles. He's a pioneer in alternative education and self-directed learning. He's a writer, speaker, podcaster, every just multi-potentialite who helps dip our toes into unschooling. We also do mention homeschooling, yes, I said it, and unpack the stigma there. Also, you might be wondering what that crackle is during the video. That's just my hair caressing my microphone. Awesome! Let's jump straight into it.
If you want to have I think a happy and successful life, you are constantly learning. If you would prefer to just be told what to do and follow instructions, and do put out as little effort as possible for maximum reward, then you don't have to keep learning that much, perhaps. And really, that's the attitude that I believe that mainstream schools often instill in young people. It's like, how can I do as little work as possible to get the highest grade, the highest reward? And I think that's a pretty crappy way to, I don't know, influence a society, to bring up the next cohort of young people. I just don't think that's going to go very well for us.
I think so, yeah, because we've sort of been classical conditioned to think that, learning, oh no, and having that misinterpretation that learning is a boring thing, that it's something that we have to do. And I really love the idea that you talk about, which is consent. Consent, we usually think of as relationships, as something that's very social, but why are you talking about consent in education?
Yeah, I think we also talk about consent pretty commonly in the medical realm.
That's true.
And we imagine that if you want to allow someone to do surgery on you, you have to be fully consenting to this. And that doesn't just mean, the surgeon says, hey, do you want me to do surgery? And you say, yeah, sure, why not? It's like they explain all the options to you, the possible implications of this choice. You want to make a fully informed decision. And I feel like the act of going to school is something that we just blithely assume everyone has to do. There is no deep conversation. There is no discussion of alternatives.
So you might be thinking, wait, what? There are alternatives, but hold on, wait, school's not compulsory? And yeah, it's true. Blake will explain more about unschooling and the whole idea there. But essentially, it's a spectrum. So conventional schooling is what we're used to, and unschooling is the opposite of that. And then what I'm focusing on mainly is the sweet spot in the middle, combining what we know about schooling with the freedom that unschooling provides.
But if you consent to the environment that you're in, you have a way better chance of taking advantage of it, of being happy in it. And so in the realm of self-directed learning, I think that you can have all different types of structures. You can have Montessori schools and you can have military schools. You can have homeschooling and you can have rigorous 4-year universities. And the common thread here is that if you know what you're getting yourself into, if you're fully consenting to this environment, then you're going to take advantage of it. And it's really your own choice then. And if you're not, whether it's an alternative, some cool hippie alternative school, or it's a regular conventional school, if you're just going there because someone else is expecting you or forcing you to go, or you haven't really thought about the alternatives, then you're probably not going to take very, good advantage of this opportunity.
For sure. Yeah, it's true. Once you come up with the decision to actually go to, say, traditional school, you know exactly what you're getting into because you've now researched, you've looked at the alternatives. I think, especially in my inner social circle, the idea of alternative education is not talked about or considered weird, unfortunately. And I think it's, parents will not really realize that there are other options. So they will inherently, because of the culture, get their children to go to school like they had, sort of forgetting how triggered they were when they were in school. And And I think before we jump into the actual alternatives, because I know you're a big unschooling pioneer, I would like to bring in a scenario. Camilla is 15. She doesn't really know what she wants in life. She just goes with the flow. She's not really engaged in class. She checks the time often to go to recess or whatever it is. Her parents, though, do want her to continue with school, to get good grades, to get into uni. She does want good grades. She likes the feeling of getting good grades. But what advice would you give Camilla? And also, what advice would you ask her to ignore?
Camilla's definitely not me. Like, what are you talking about?
It's so hard to give generalizable advice in this realm, because I would also want to know, does she have close friendships with peers and with her teachers? Does she enjoy extracurriculars at school? Because for some kids, going through the sort of mindless repetition of classes is okay if they get to participate in a really wonderful band or drama or mock trial or a sports group.
Mock trial? Sorry,
and
what was that?
Oh, sorry, maybe that's an American term. That's where you act like you're in a court, like there's lawyers and judges and jury.
You're kidding. Oh
and
my
it's
God.
it's a very fun and engaging thing, and it turns into a kind of national level competition sometimes between mock trial teams. So
cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
anyway.
exactly that.
Yeah.
That can be one of the really engaging aspects of a large conventional school, and something that's harder to do at a small alternative school that doesn't have as many resources. And so that's why I'm saying maybe a few more. I'm not being a good respondent to your question right now. I'm saying I need more information.
That's fine.
But so the advice I would give her is probably the same advice I normally give every teenager, which is, don't let yourself waste too much time being bored and disengaged. Like, find out what you consider the most interesting challenges in your environment, the stuff you're going to learn the most from, and make that your full-time priority. And if making it your full-time priority means you have to step outside of the conventional system, then so be it. You can do that. Many other young people have done it before. You can still go to uni. You can still get good jobs. You are not ruining your life by doing that. In fact, by focusing on what engages you, you will probably make your life a lot better. And you will probably, kind of develop these skills and attitudes that other people don't really think about or have a chance to develop until they're done with formal education. Yeah. And maybe never, because so many people do formal education, they step right into a full-time job, and they just never have this opportunity to really be a self-directed learner.
No, it's definitely true. Just going through the motions and sort of being like, yeah, I guess I enjoy it. Question mark. And then
yeah. There are worse things that could be happening to me right now. I shouldn't complain too much.
Right. Well, everyone around me is sort of, feeling the same way I do. I guess this is normal. When no, not really. I mean, if everyone's just blindly going there the same way and not really understanding what fulfills them in the end, it's sort of just, for me, going through high school, I had that same experience where I've only realized now what I actually enjoy.
So an example of this is me having the misconception that I wasn't good at English in school, that I didn't like it. Even though I really enjoy writing right now, and my days consist of writing blog posts and writing upon writing. So yeah, pretty ironic.
I genuinely believe that school does work for some kids, but I think that there's this very large group of people who are kind of quietly dissatisfied. And then there's a more vocal group of young people who are very, openly dissatisfied about school. And then of those groups, there's only a small fraction of those who have the resources and fortitude to actually do something about it.
So for example, things like alternative schools being so expensive, like the tuition fees are crazy. Also, if you choose to unschool or homeschool, that means that you have the luxury to have the time to help your children or whatever it is. So yeah, alternative schooling is pretty much a privilege right now.
And
Yeah.
so certainly the alternative education movement is a small sliver of the overall population. And it's not something that everyone has to do or should do necessarily.
Yeah, latching on to what you said about how only a small portion of people actually will get so, what's the word? They are so uncomfortable with the environment that they're in with conventional schooling that they will actually just revolt against it or not follow the rules and not be obedient. I was the opposite. I was very obedient and I did very well in school. But it's to the point where, yeah, they actually cannot thrive in this environment. And I guess that's very much unschooling or the homeschooling or the alternative movement, which you're referring to. And for our audience here, because first of all, alternative schooling in general is a very new concept. And we're sort of dipping our toes. I sort of introduced it in a previous episode. Now we're going into unschooling. And I think they have no idea what unschooling is. So can you give a quick dip in the toes, nice easing way into unschooling?
Sure. A nice gentle introduction to unschooling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it needs a gentle introduction because the term is not a good term, just linguistically speaking. It doesn't mean anything. It just feels very anti. And homeschooling equally is a pretty bad and misleading term. It makes us think school at home. And why would you do that to a poor child? Just making them do the same stuff they could be doing at school with some friends, instead stuck at home,
True,
with parents and siblings and, deprived and unsocialized. Those poor children, we should outlaw homeschooling. Where I'm calling you from, Germany, they have outlawed homeschooling.
Oh.
It's completely illegal here. Yeah.
Ooh,
so
okay.
there are some countries that they genuinely, will not let you homeschool. But I'm from the United States, and in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and some other countries too.
So I had a look at the list of homeschooling countries on Wikipedia, and I see you, Estonia. You is small, but you is important.
In the US, it's a state-by-state thing, and many states, like California, where I'm from, they have no regulations about what you have to do whatsoever. Like theoretically, you're supposed to teach your kids the core academic subjects, but there's no state official that can ever check on you doing that.
Okay, so I imagine that you guys are a bit concerned right now, rightfully so. So I just imagine your frown lines sort of appearing. If you're questioning, oh my God, what about the children's future? Like, aren't you screwing yourself over? Yeah, I do ask Blake a lot about that, so you can keep watching. Also, he mentions a homeschooling teen who was obsessed with Vikings, and she actually managed to sit in on Yale University lectures about Vikings. So anything is possible. If you're curious and you just want to jump straight to it, that's at 14 minutes 45.
So really, you can do whatever you want, and that is what enables unschooling. Unschooling is using the laws of homeschooling to maximize your freedom, to essentially customize your child's experience to whatever works for them.
Blake does speak a lot from the perspective of a parent because that's his target audience. So essentially, his audience is middle-aged parents and a human adult being who has an 100% track record of being ID'd.
And a lot of people talking about interest-led learning or curiosity-driven learning. That all feels very similar to self-directed learning for me. And in a typical homeschooling family, you have the parents saying, okay, here's some stuff you have to do because we think it's important for your future growth or success or whatever. It's like, you have to do some math, you have to do some foreign language, and maybe you have to go outside and exercise every once in a while, child.
Oh, God forbid.
I know, God forbid you get off the computer for a moment. I say that as someone who loved playing computer games and video games throughout my adolescent years.
I see.
So,
okay.
But then unschooling is about going to the far end of the self-directed part of that spectrum and saying, listen, kid, I'm here for you as a resource. I will be your helper. If you ask me to be your guide or teacher, I will do that, but I will not assume that I'm going to put myself in that. Yes, I'm still your parent. Yes, I'm still going to make sure you are fed and clothed. And yes, I will
Thank God.
make sure you try to go exercise every once in a while.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, when it comes to learning stuff, I'm going to follow your lead. And so if that means that you want to get totally into Vikings, a young woman who I met at a talk I was given some years ago, that was her thing. As a homeschooler, she watched this documentary about Vikings, and then she said, this is great. I want to go super deep into this. And so she read books, watched documentaries, YouTube videos. When she turned 16, her family said, like, in the US, there's a sweet 16 birthday party culture. And so this young woman said, please do not give me a sweet 16. Instead, help me buy a plane ticket to London so I can go see this like actual Viking ship, which has been reconstructed and is in a museum. and eventually this young woman, she lives in Connecticut, not far away from New Haven, which is where Yale University is. She discovered that there was a new course being offered by a new professor at Yale all about Vikings. And she, with the help of her mom, she reached out to this professor by just emailing the professor and said, listen, I'm a 16-year-old homeschooler. I have this crazy passion for Vikings. And I know that Yale doesn't allow anyone to just sit in on classes, but like, I was wondering if there's any way I could still participate in this class. And the professor responded and said, why don't you and your mom come in and we'll talk. And, you know, they had a good connection, and the professor said, all right, please come sit in on my classes. And by the way, here's a copy of the new textbook I just published about Vikings. And so, you know, that's perhaps a special situation. That's not an everyday thing in the lives of homeschoolers, but I think it represents what's possible. And so, and that is something that can happen in the world of unschooling, when parents decide to fully support their kids' interests and curiosities, and not just when it's a very clear and maybe socially approved interest, like you know, learning about Viking history would be. That's a bit maybe weird and specific, but at least you know adults can wrap their heads around it. Because sometimes unschooling looks like letting your kids play a bunch of video games and watch Netflix for months and months on end, and that too is unschooling.
I see you frown lines. I can feel your skepticism. But Blake explains a lot more about how that factors in with deschooling, and I ask him to elaborate a bit more.
In the next section, I was going to do some rapid fire worries, which we will dig into because it's, I think, generic thoughts that people would have about unschooling. But about the video games, because, let the kids, you know, there's no curriculum. Let them do what they want. And a kid so much as loves, you know, like World of Warcraft. What happens then? Because if they spend all day, every day on World of Warcraft, do you think that's going to be beneficial for them?
Again, it's hard to say. You know, kids can have positive relationships with games and they can have negative relationships with games. And in the unschooling world, there's this concept of deschooling. And this idea states that if you have been in a highly controlling school environment for a long time, you need a break. You need sort of like a mandatory vacation to let your intrinsic motivation system come back online. It has been offline for quite a while. So you need to, another way to think of this is you need to have the experience of feeling what boredom is like again, the feeling of, wow, if no one forces me to do anything, actually nothing will happen in my life. And that feels kind of bad. That feels kind of like I am wasting my time. And this can be a very difficult thing for parents to do because maybe they hear the story about the unschooler who sat in on a Yale class about Vikings and they say, all right, you were in school last year and now we're unschooling this year, so start doing amazing things immediately. And what the kid really needs is some time to decompress. There's a rule of thumb that for every 1 year that a kid has been in conventional school, give them 1 month of time to really do anything they need to be doing, which can include sitting around and playing World of Warcraft. I actually think sitting around and playing World of Warcraft is a pretty positive scenario. You know, there's a reason that kids love World of Warcraft or Minecraft or The Sims or Fortnite or any of these other
Pokemon.
modern complex, Pokemon Go.
So then I started reminiscing about Pokemon Sapphire, the first Pokemon game I ever played, and I remember catching a Kyogre with an Ultra Ball. Literally, like, one of the best days in my childhood. Actually, one of the best days of my life.
Yep.
And the games today are way more networked and social than the games I was playing in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is actually a lot of socialization going on. It's not like kids just playing Super Mario Brothers by themselves in the basement anymore.
Yeah.
And also, these games are incredibly challenging, and that's why the kids are there. If a game is too easy, a kid will walk away from it very quickly. And we all know this. If we've played a game, we know that if it's too easy, it's not that interesting. And in World of Warcraft specifically, when you finish a quest, your reward is not like the end of the game. Your reward is another harder quest.
Yeah.
And that's something that we should really pay attention to, because young people, when they play high quality games, and the ones I mentioned, I think are high quality. I'm not trying to defend like Candy Crush or games that are more like, slot machines.
Yeah.
And so with these really high quality games, kids are voluntarily doing hard things, and they are seeking out challenges. That ultimately is what we want young people to be doing. That's what I believe. We want young people to voluntarily take on hard challenges. And then when they finish one, to seek out the next one. Like that's a good way to contribute to society right there. As adults, we just have a trouble seeing this value in games, because we put all games into the category of essentially slot machines, in the same way that it's easy for adults to say, anytime my kid is on YouTube, they're just watching dumb, mindless content, when in fact there is some really wonderful, enriching content.
So I'm not sure if this falls under dumb and mindless or enriching, but I remember one time I stumbled on a video of a hippo pooing in the zoo. I don't know how I got there, but it made me question my life and simultaneously scarred me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are people like Vsauce and Mark Rober and everyone who it's like, I would say the edutainment, but mainly educational, but presented in such a great way that it's just so engaging. And I think when you start talking about deschooling and the video game stuff, it really sounds like that deschooling period is rediscovering what fun is like and associating the learning with fun. Because for so long, we start to see that learning isn't fun. So this is sort of like the transitioning period for that. And I think this is sort of included in the rapid fire worries, to be honest, because again, I think a lot of people are having culture shock with unschooling because it's such a new concept, especially when there is no strict curriculum, high school curriculum for, say, uni. And I know that you get this a lot, but could you please explain how students who unschool or homeschool, for that matter, or do alternative schooling, have a chance at uni?
Yeah, that's what I wrote my first book about. So happy to discuss it.
Oh, yeah.
Essentially, you can wait until the kid actually has interest in going to uni. This is the very short answer. You can let the kid play World of Warcraft. You can let the kid just learn about Vikings and not learn about math for quite a long time. And ideally, what's happening here is that this kid is developing his or her ability to, focus and follow an interest and follow something that feels meaningful to them in a very effective way. That's sort of the meta level skill that's being developed here. That's the self-directed learning. And so then when the kid realizes that, I actually do think I should go to uni because this will be useful to my life, or because it seems like a meaningful experience, then they will be able to take that same focus and apply it on the task of doing whatever they need to do to pass the exams to get into uni. Now, this is very different based on what country we're in, but in the United States, to get into university, you can either apply as a normal first-year student, or you can go into a 2-year community college, which are affordable and accessible. They're all over the US. You can start taking these classes when you're 16 or sometimes younger, and you can do 2 years of general liberal arts education and then transfer into a 4-year university.
Yeah.
And in both these cases, there are unschoolers who don't touch academics for years and years. They don't touch academics until they're 13 or 15 or 17.
Wow.
And then they say, okay, wait a second. I do want to go to college. Maybe I discovered that archaeology is a cool thing, maybe by watching some sweet YouTube videos. And now, okay, what do I have to do to become an archaeologist? Oh, I have to go get this bachelor's of science degree. And what do I need? Oh, I need to have chemistry, and I need to have math, and I need to have maybe some English, and the stuff that we all assume it takes years and years for a kid to learn. But really, it takes years and years for a kid to be taught the academic basics that are university prerequisites. That's different from learning, in the same way that school is different from education. And so what typically happens, in my experience, is that these young people, once they have the sort of proper motivation to jump through all these hoops to get into university, they will do it very rapidly in a much more efficient way than they would if they were sitting through classes bored, distracted by other students, with a bunch of busy work.
And this idea really reminds me of my discussion with Moko in episode 7, and we were talking about language learning and how on exchange you go for like 3 days and you're already learning more than you did in a semester. So it's possible to really immerse yourself in something and learn something in a really short period of time.
In the US, there are these exams like the SAT and the ACT, which are completely disconnected from the school system. And so you can study for these exams, and you can get tutoring, you can take practice exams, and you can do all of this at your own pace. You can do it from home. And so that's one way that these kids prove that they can get into university. Community college is another way. And every once in a while, there are unschoolers who do almost nothing. Like, they don't do any standard tests, and they also don't do any community college. But they just take all of the learning that they've done and they put it into a transcript. Usually, a parent does this, or you can hire like a consultant to do this for a little bit of money. And then you have what looks like a normal school transcript. It's not accredited, but it still is written in the correct language. And you submit that to the college. And especially for colleges that are not super competitive, not the Yale universities of the world, when they see that this person is a self-motivated learner who has spent their time doing some interesting stuff, they can obviously focus. And yes, they need to have some, demonstrated academics under their belt. If you just say, I've played World of Warcraft for the past 12 years, no, you're not going to get into university with that. That's very doubtful. But with someone who has a basic diversity of experiences under their belt, like, they get into university. It happens consistently. It's been happening since the 80s and 90s. It's no longer a controversial fact, at least in the United States.
So in Australia, it's pretty much the same. We have TAFE, and we have unis like Swinburne, which actually offer uni entrance for homeschoolers. So, homeschooling does have that stigma, but my point is that if unis accept homeschoolers into uni, then alternative schools like the one Danica went to are pretty valid. And, they meet conventional schooling and unschooling in the middle.
Yeah, and sort of going back to what you said about the learners who cram, like, say 16 years of schooling into I don't know how long, but
maybe a year or two. Yeah.
Okay. I was like 2 months, 1 month.
Less likely.
Yeah. Do you have any real life examples of like an example of some student who managed to do that and sort of learn maths, learn English or something? Could you mention one of them?
Well, I've just heard this story so many times from parents that it's almost, they all blend together at this point. And so let's just take math, because that's the most anxiety inducing subject, because a lot of kids really honestly will not do math if they're not forced to do math. And so that's the very last thing for them to learn. Yeah. And especially if someone who, has interest in the arts, they're thinking about going to uni and they think, why do I have to learn this math stuff? It's not going to apply, but they still have to because it's part of the prerequisites. Then, that can be a genuinely challenging situation. But I have heard this story over and over again, that kids who only have basic math, they can go to the store, they can, calculate change, that kind of stuff. Maybe they can do basic fractions and decimals. When those kids then need to get caught up through the level of algebra, perhaps, then, they essentially attack this like they would attack any other maybe not so savory thing that they have to do in life. And they just think, how can I do this with the least amount of suffering possible, as quickly as possible. And so for some kids, that means they get a math tutor and they work with that tutor for, 6 months.
And it doesn't surprise me about this, because if you have a tutor, that means personalized learning, pinpointing weaknesses and everything, and really having that one-on-one approach, which means that you can get through the work a lot quicker.
And instead of just following the regular school curriculum, they just, follow whatever they need to do to pass this prerequisite to get into uni. They use that as the guidelines. And so that's one way to do it. Other ones, they use Khan Academy. They self-teach using these wonderful online resources that are already available. Others might have a parent or a family friend who's willing to help. But, there are so many wonderful academic resources out there. That's not anything that we lack in this world. And some of them you have to pay money for. Some of them are free. I'd say mostly they're free nowadays. And so what's missing is the motivation and the drive. And that is what makes math such a nightmare for so many students and for their teachers, because the kids don't see any relevance to the real world stuff that they're going to be doing. I focused in math class because I thought I wanted to be a research scientist. I felt like it was quite relevant to what I thought I wanted to do. And also I naturally excelled in it. And so that gave me the motivation to focus on it. But so many other kids just, anything, once you get past, pre-algebra, most kids are like, this literally, I will literally never do this.
And I remember in school, there was such a stigma of not doing maths, like it was just expected, or there was a pressure to do it. Even though if you really didn't enjoy it and it doesn't serve any purpose beyond school, then what's the point?
I am definitely guilty of doubting, being like, I thought maths, learning from a young age was essential.
And this is true to an extent, like knowing the foundations when we're younger, for example, reading, writing, and general maths. I mean, it does set us up for more accesses to opportunities, but it's not the end all or be all.
I thought that you had to start at this certain age and then you will become great by the time you're 17, 18 and ready to go into uni. And I think, those sort of assumptions that we make in our heads underestimate the power of adult learning as well, because I have been doing Crash Course Economics on YouTube, the one created by, I think, John and Hank Green. And that one is so entertaining. And I have been reading the comments in the YouTube videos being like, they just explained it like 3 weeks of lectures in one video. And I'm like, I totally bypass you all as I do 10 videos and learn the basics of economics. And I think, in those situations, we do sort of forget that learning is easy once we have the motivation and drive to do it.
And especially in the modern era, learning is easy when the motivation is there. Because, for example, the homeschooling movement in the US really took off in the 1990s, paralleling the internet, essentially. That's when it exploded. And I don't think that is a coincidence. No, I'm sorry. That is a coincidence. That is a coincidence. Because there are so many options now. In the past, it was just the library, really. If you wanted to be an autodidact, you had to love learning by reading books. And now you can learn about economics by watching Crash Course. For me, I am also a self-taught economics geek, and I have learned the most through podcasts and through reading books also. But one of my favorite podcasts is Econ Talk by this wonderful professor named Russ Roberts. He's been doing it since 2006. He's a long-time podcaster.
I will check it out. Cool.
Yeah, and he essentially just brings on people who have recently published books that he finds fascinating, and he reads their book and then he interviews them for an hour. That's his whole shtick, and that has been such an engaging way for me to learn about economics and broader. He'll talk about much broader issues that somehow connect back to concepts in economics. And that is so accessible to me. I did take a micro and a macroeconomics class when I was in high school. And it was just like these narrow calculations about GDP. It was all this like very
Yeah.
technical, almost accounting style economics. It was so boring and unengaging and just miserable. And if that
Yeah.
was my only exposure to it, there's no way I would self-teach economics. But yeah, the fact that we have all of these resources, all of these smaller actors who are creating interesting content, it really is the golden age of self-directed learning right now.
It is. And also, yeah, if you only had that one perspective on economics, for example, if you were only introduced to boring tables with numbers and percentages.
Sorry, maths. I feel like I'm really trashing you this episode.
And you could for sure associate economics with that and just thinking that economics is always going to be boring, and have that confirmation bias and thinking, oh no, I want to avoid this from now on.
Yeah.
Leading into also that misconception that I am not good at economics, or I am not an economics person, which is such bullshit, because it's almost like we identify with being a certain way because of one small exposure of a subject. And because of the information age, having 5 mediums to explain one concept, it contradicts our prior beliefs potentially, or it just gives us a more nuanced insight into a subject.
And now onto the last part of our conversation. So Blake's discussing why we're accepting conventional schools as they are, and sort of how we would look back at it from the future.
These are things that we all just sort of accept today, that in the future, people are going to say, why was this okay? And I suggest in the book that we should add another thing to the list, which is this large-scale system of compulsory schooling that very clearly does not serve a majority of the young people in it. It's largely a waste of their time. They're not engaged. They're not doing meaningful work. They're going through the motions. They're learning how to play the school game. And it's, they're learning how to compete and succeed within this very limited sphere. And this sphere is something that doesn't really exist again once they get into adult life. It's like school is this alien world. It's this institution we've created because we don't know what else to do with kids, and especially with adolescents. Like everyone agrees that kids need to learn how to read, write, and do very basic mathematics. But beyond that, does everyone have to learn algebra? Does everyone have to be exposed to chemistry for a full year? Like, I think the answer is clearly no. If you want one reform that you could make to public schools that would make them a lot better, just make every class optional, right? Let kids go to classes they want to go to. That would make life better for the students who are in the class. It would make life better for the teachers, and it would be this kind of democratic feedback system about what kids actually want to need. If you have kids who are like, I don't want to go to any of these classes, then the public school educators or private school educators, it would be their mission to then create something that actually engages these young people and feels meaningful to them and challenges them in a way that they want to be challenged. Like,
my econ brain just thought of supply and demand. Aha.
Yeah, you can call it supply and demand. You can just call it like respecting people's choices.
Yeah. Okay.
Not compelling people to do stuff they don't want to do. That's what a free society should be about.
For sure. Thank you. And to wrap up, I read your book, The Art of Self-Directed Learning, which is awesome. I really enjoyed it. It was the right, it had perfect humor to it, but it was also very informative.
Thank you.
I did have a question because I was reading through it and my eyeballs just stopped on this sentence. You did a 6-week leadership retreat, and you, I guess you could explain it, but really you did an entrepreneur weekend, and the students traded paper clips for golf clubs. And how did that happen?
Well, I think there was about 8 steps in between the paper clips and the golf clubs, but I really just took I took a challenge that somebody else created and I added it to my leadership program. And so you can just Google one red paperclip and you'll find the story of this guy who, a Canadian guy who gave himself a challenge that over the course of 1 year, he would start with like this little insignificant object he found on his desk, one red paperclip, and he would try to trade that, without any money being involved, just swapping, trade that for something of slightly higher value and keep doing that over and over again until he actually ended up with a house in Canada.
What?
Yeah, you should find, I believe he has a TED Talk or some video like that. And again, just Google one red paperclip. And so it's this wonderful story of what you can do if you have this kind of certain attitude and if you can tell a good story about, your mission, your purpose. And because those are all the assets that this guy, Kyle, had. He had like this kind of positive attitude. And then he had this story he was telling. He's like, I'm trying to trade a paperclip into something much bigger. And people loved hearing that story and they liked him. And so they would trade stuff with him. And they got to become part of his story. And so I think Kyle is a wonderful example of a motivated and ingenious self-directed learner who, creates some cool project that enriches his life and enriches the lives of others. And so that's what I tried to do with the young adults who were part of that program. They didn't have a year. They had 2 days, I believe. and they had a small town in Southern Oregon to, find people to trade with. And they ended up with a set of golf clubs from a local used sporting goods store. And they ended up, playing golf in a park as their victory.
That's so good. Oh my gosh. I want to do this on my bucket list. One red paperclip. Awesome. And, and this is very irrelevant, but I wanted to ask anyway. Did you ever manage to find your beanie? The one that says teach.
What a tragedy.
Yeah,
the beanie
I felt really bad for you.
Yeah, the class that I led at Berkeley called Never Taught to Learn had this wonderful beanie that a student knit for me that said, teach yourself to learn to, and then the words reconnected to back to the beginning. So it said, teach yourself to learn to teach yourself to learn. And I loved it. And I had it for like a week or two before I lost it in this giant supermarket. And no, I never found it again. And it's one of the great regrets of my life, Joanna.
I'm so sorry to end it on such a sad note. That's like the last question I have.
I'm just gonna go cry myself to sleep.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, I mean, cool. I guess this is the end of the episode.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Cool. Anyway, thank you so much though, Blake, for being on this podcast. It really means a lot to me. And where can people find you and your work?
You can find everything I do on my website, BlakeBoles, BOLES.com. The podcast, the books, other writing, weird projects that I'm doing, my email newsletter. It's all there.
Great. Thank you so much.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation with Blake Boles. Of course, you can check out his work online. He's just done so much and it's really inspiring to see. Also, if you have any feedback for this podcast episode or the podcast in general, then please contact itsjjyang at gmail.com. Also, any information that you want, it'd probably be in the podcast description. Awesome. See you next week.